The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has decided to award the 2023 Nobel Prize in Chemistry to Moungi G. Bawendi, Louis E. Brus and Alexei I. Ekimov for the discovery and synthesis of quantum dots. The Nobel Prize in Chemistry 2023 rewards the discovery and development of quantum dots, nanoparticles so tiny that their size determines their properties. These smallest components of nanotechnology now spread their light from televisions and LED lamps and can also guide surgeons when they remove tumor tissue, among many other things. Everyone who studies chemistry learns that an element's properties are governed by how many electrons it has. However, when matter shrinks to nanodimensions, quantum phenomena arise. These are governed by the size of the matter. The Nobel laureates in Chemistry 2023 have succeeded in producing particles so small that their properties are determined by quantum phenomena. The particles, which are called quantum dots, are now of great importance in nanotechnology. Quantum dots have many fascinating and unusual properties. Importantly, they have different colors depending on their size. Physicists had long known that, in theory, size-dependent quantum effects could arise in nanoparticles. But at that time, it was almost impossible to sculpt in nanodimensions. Therefore, few people believed that this knowledge would be put to practical use. However, in the early 1980s, Alexei Ekimov succeeded in creating size-dependent quantum effects in colored glass. The color came from nanoparticles of copper chloride, and Ekimov demonstrated that the particle size affected the color of the glass via quantum effects. A few years later, Louis Brus was the first scientist in the world to prove size-dependent quantum effects in particles floating freely in a fluid. In 1993, Moungi Bawendi revolutionized the chemical production of quantum dots, resulting in almost perfect particles. This high quality was necessary for them to be utilized in applications. Quantum dots now illuminate computer monitors and television screens based on QLED technology. They also add nuance to the light of some LED lamps, and biochemists and doctors use them to map biological tissue. Quantum dots are thus bringing the greatest benefit to humankind. Researchers believe that in the future they could contribute to flexible electronics, tiny sensors, thinner solar cells, and encrypted quantum communication. So we have just started exploring the potential of these tiny particles. In the nano world, things really do behave differently. Once the size of matter starts to be measured in millionths of a millimeter, strange phenomena start to occur. Quantum effects that challenge our intuition. The 2023 Nobel laureates in chemistry have all been pioneers in the exploration of the nano world. In the early 1980s, Louis Brus and Alexei Ekimov succeeded in creating, independently of each other, quantum dots, which are nanoparticles so tiny that quantum effects determine their characteristics. In 1993, Moungi Bawendi revolutionized the methods for manufacturing quantum dots, making their quality extremely high, a vital prerequisite for their use in today's nanotechnology. Thanks to the work of the laureates, humanity is now able to utilize some of the peculiar properties of the nano world. Quantum dots are now found in commercial products and used across many scientific disciplines, from physics and chemistry to medicine. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let's uncover the background to the Nobel Prize in Chemistry 2023. When Alexei Ekimov and Louis Brus produced the first quantum dots, scientists already knew that they could, in theory, have unusual characteristics. In 1937, the physicist Herbert Froelich had already predicted that nanoparticles would not behave like other particles. He explored the theoretical consequences of the famous Schrödinger equation, which shows that when particles become extremely small, there is less space for the material's electrons. In turn, the electrons, which are both waves and particles, are squeezed together. Froelich realized that this would result in drastic changes to the material's properties. Researchers were fascinated by this insight, and using mathematical tools, they succeeded in predicting numerous size-dependent quantum effects. They also worked to try to demonstrate them in reality. But this was easier said than done because they needed to sculpt a structure that was about 1,000,000 times smaller than a pinhead. Still, in the 1970s, researchers did succeed in making such a nanostructure. Using a type of molecular beam, they created a nano-thin layer of coating material on top of a bulk material. Once the assembly was complete, they were able to show that the coating's optical properties varied depending on how thin it was, an observation that matched the predictions of quantum mechanics. This was a major breakthrough, but the experiment required very advanced technology. Researchers needed both an ultra-high vacuum and temperatures close to absolute zero, so few people expected that quantum mechanical phenomena would be put to practical use. However, now and again, science offers up the unexpected, and this time the turning point was due to studies of an ancient invention, colored glass. The oldest archaeological finds of colored glass are from several thousand years ago. Glassmakers have tested their way to an understanding of how glass can be produced in all the colors of the rainbow. They added substances such as silver, gold, and cadmium, and then played with different temperatures to produce beautiful shades of glass. In the 19th and 20th centuries, when physicists started to investigate the optical properties of light, the glassmakers' knowledge was put to use. Physicists could use colored glass to filter out selected wavelengths of light. To optimize their experiments, they started to produce glass themselves, which led to important insights. One thing they learned was that a single substance could result in completely differently colored glass. For example, a mixture of cadmium selenide and cadmium sulfide could make glass turn either yellow or red. Which one it became depended on how much the molten glass was heated and how it was cooled. Eventually, they were also able to show that the colors came from particles forming inside the glass and that the color depended on the particles' size. This was more or less the state of the knowledge at the end of the 1970s when one of this year's laureates, Alexei Ekimov, a recent doctoral graduate, started working at the S.I. Valvilo State Optical Institute in what was then the Soviet Union. The fact that a single substance could result in different colored glass interested Alexei Ekimov because it is actually illogical. If you paint a picture in cadmium red, it will always be cadmium red unless you mix in other pigments. So, how could a single substance give glass of different colors? During his doctoral degree, Ekimov studied semiconductors, important components in microelectronics. In this field, optical methods are used as diagnostic tools for assessing the quality of semiconducting material. Researchers shine light on the material and measure the absorbance. This reveals what substances the material is made from and how well ordered the crystal structure is. Ekimov was familiar with these methods, so he began using them to examine colored glass. After some initial experiments, he decided to systematically produce glass that was tinted with copper chloride. He heated the molten glass to a range of temperatures between 500 degrees Celsius and 700 degrees Celsius, varying the heating time from 1 hour to 96 hours. Once the glass had cooled and hardened, he X-rayed it. The scattered rays showed that tiny crystals of copper chloride had formed inside the glass, and the manufacturing process affected the size of these particles. In some of the glass samples, they were only about 2 nanometers. In others, they were up to 30 nanometers. Interestingly, it turned out that the glass's light absorption was affected by the size of the particles. The biggest particles absorb the light in the same way that copper chloride normally does. But the smaller the particles, the bluer the light that they absorbed. As a physicist, Ekimov was well acquainted with the laws of quantum mechanics and quickly realized that he had observed a size-dependent quantum effect. This was the first time someone had succeeded in deliberately producing quantum dots, nanoparticles that cause size-dependent quantum effects. In 1981, Ekimov published his discovery in a Soviet scientific journal, but this was difficult for researchers on the other side of the Iron Curtain to access. Therefore, this year's next Nobel Prize laureate in chemistry, Louis Brus, was unaware of Alexei Ekimov's discovery when in 1983 he was the first researcher in the world to discover size-dependent quantum effects in particles floating freely in a solution. Louis Brus was working at Bell Laboratories in the US with the long-term aim of making chemical reactions happen using solar energy. To achieve this, he was using particles of cadmium sulfide, which can capture light and then utilize its energy to drive reactions. The particles were in a solution and Brus made them very small because this gave him a larger area on which the chemical reactions could take place. The more a material is chopped up, the greater the surface area it will expose to its surroundings. During his work with these tiny particles, Brus noticed something strange. Their optical properties changed after he had left them on the lab bench for a while. He guessed that this could be because the particles had grown. So, to confirm his suspicions, he produced cadmium sulfide particles that were just about 4.5 nanometers in diameter. Brus then compared the optical properties of these newly made particles with those of the larger particles, which had a diameter of about 12.5 nanometers. The larger particles absorb light at the same wavelengths as cadmium sulfide generally does, but the smaller particles had an absorption that shifted towards blue. Just like Ekimov, Brus understood that he had observed a size-dependent quantum effect. He published his discovery in 1983 and then started investigating particles made from a range of other substances. The pattern was the same. The smaller the particles, the bluer the light they absorbed. This is where you may be tempted to ask, why does it matter if a substance's absorbance is slightly more towards blue? Why is that so amazing? Well, the optical changes revealed that the substance's characteristics had completely changed. A substance's optical properties are governed by its electrons. The same electrons also govern the substance's other properties, such as its ability to catalyze chemical reactions or conduct electricity. So, when researchers detected the changed absorption, they understood that, in principle, they were looking at an entirely new material. If you want to understand the magnitude of this discovery, you can imagine that the periodic table suddenly gained a third dimension. An element's properties are not only affected by the number of electron shells and how many electrons are there at the outer shell, but at the nano level, size also matters. A chemist who wanted to develop a new material thus had another factor to play with. Of course, this tickled researchers' imaginations. There was just one problem. The methods Brus had used to fabricate nanoparticles generally resulted in unpredictable quality. Quantum dots are tiny crystals, and the ones that could be produced at that time often contain defects. They were also of varying sizes. It was possible to control how the crystals were formed so the particles had a given average size, but if researchers wanted all the particles in a solution to be about the same size, they had to sort them after they were made. This was a difficult process that hindered development. This was a problem that this year's third Nobel Prize laureate in chemistry decided to solve. Moungi Bawendi started his postdoctoral training at Louis Brus's laboratory in 1988, where intensive work was underway to improve the methods used to produce quantum dots. Using a range of solvents, temperatures and techniques, they experimented with a variety of substances to try and form well-organized nanocrystals. And the crystals were getting better, but were still not good enough. However, Bawendi did not give up. When he started working as a research leader at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, he continued his efforts to produce high-quality nanoparticles. The major breakthrough came in 1993 when the research group injected the substances that would form nanocrystals into a heated and carefully chosen solvent. They injected as much of the substances as was necessary to precisely saturate the solution, which led to tiny crystal embryos beginning to form simultaneously. Then, by dynamically varying the temperature of the solution, Bawendi and his research group succeeded in growing nanocrystals of a specific size. During this phase, the solvent helped give the crystals a smooth and even surface. The nanocrystals that Bawendi produced were almost perfect, giving rise to distinct quantum effects. Because the production method was easy to use, it was revolutionary. More and more chemists started working with nanotechnology and began to investigate the unique properties of quantum dots. 30 years later, quantum dots are now an important part of nanotechnology's toolbox and are found in commercial products. Researchers have primarily utilized quantum dots to create colored light. If quantum dots are illuminated with blue light, they absorb the light and emit a different color. Modifying the size of the particles makes it possible to determine exactly what color they should glow. The luminous properties of quantum dots are utilized in computer and television screens based on QLED technology, where the Q stands for quantum dot. In these screens, blue light is generated using the energy efficient diodes that were recognized with the Nobel Prize in Physics 2014. Quantum dots are used to change the color of some of the blue light, transforming it into red or green. This makes it possible to produce the three primary colors of light needed in a television screen. Similarly, quantum dots are used in some LED lamps to adjust the cold light of the diodes. The light can then become as energizing as daylight or as calming as the warm glow from a dimmed bulb. The light from quantum dots can also be used in biochemistry and medicine. Biochemists attach quantum dots to biomolecules to map cells and organs. Doctors have begun investigating the potential use of quantum dots to track tumor tissue in the body. Chemists instead use the catalytic properties of quantum dots to drive chemical reactions. Quantum dots are thus bringing the greatest benefit to humankind, and we have just begun to explore their potential. Researchers believe that in the future, quantum dots can contribute to flexible electronics, minuscule sensors, slimmer solar cells, and perhaps encrypted quantum communication. One thing is certain, there is a lot left to learn about amazing quantum phenomena.